talk very quickly, if we may, about the board and cybersecurity. And one of the major areas of opportunity that seems to be consistently talked about is whether the board and the ExCo of major enterprises are seeing cybersecurity as a necessary evil or as an enabler to good business. And the old analogy of, cybersecurity should be seen as the brakes on a Formula One car, and if you don't have really good brakes, you can't get around the corners quickly. But do we think there are challenges? I think I know the answer to this one, but do you think there are challenges that remain in the boardroom and at ExCo level around how cybersecurity is seen as an enabler within a business, as a necessary part of that business, or it's actually just the cost that we think we should probably do, but we don't really deal with, but we don't really know how or why?
Yeah, it's definitely a mix. I think the first point is that cybersecurity is not an IT risk; it's a business risk, and actually, it's encompassing on everything. And if we kind of look back at what we were talking about before, which is most companies are turning into digital companies, where everything is kind of being run from a technology perspective. So actually, we've gone past as security as just being a cost center. To the point where it absolutely is an enabler, but actually has to be built in, not bolted on. So whenever we talk about this whole concept of security, sort of privacy, resilience by design, and I think that's really, really critical. So, as we're evolving our business processes, as we were sort of saying, is more people are working remotely, more people have got multiple different devices, and just the way that consumers want to actually engage with different companies and how they interact with services. Everything has a digital element to it. And it's real. I think, therefore, that the whole of that sort of cyber and the resilience of all of these things combined is really, really important in terms of actually how you manage and enable cybersecurity across the business. But I think as much as we talk about the technology, we have to also look at it from the people's perspective as well, and make sure that they understand what the increased risk is. As we're changing our working environment, we're changing policies, as we're sort of saying, they're potentially using their own devices, multiple devices, logging in from anywhere at any time. There are therefore risks associated with that, but we've got to put it into a context and a language that people can understand. And I think maybe cybersecurity has been kind of thought about as a bit of a dark art. It's a very niche subject known by a niche set of people, and I think that's the kind of mold that we have to break. To make it much more accessible, a lot more understanding. And as I sort of say, it's just part and parcel of doing business in a modern world.
Absolutely. I think you're dead right there. And I like the role of the CISO, I think, is evolving with that business aspect. These are not my words, but I really like the idea of the role of the CISO being positioned in that intersection between the business and risk. Yeah. Rather than technology and risk, which is seems to be historically where it's seen, and it's great to hear that you think that evolution is continuing. With that in mind, though, consistently we're seeing the cybersecurity leaders that are either moving into a CISO position or currently in post as being very technical in their background. They come from a very technical or very cybersecurity focused background, and it doesn't seem like we're equipping them with the necessary skills to function in a much more strategic position. So communicating to the board effectively and looking at different leadership structures, different leadership approaches, broadening their knowledge of how big business actually runs and where cybersecurity fits within that. Do you think that we can do more to develop the areas of opportunity for cybersecurity leaders that reside outside of just that technical sphere to make them much better in their job?
Yeah, absolutely. Business. Absolutely. I think there's some sort of key things that you just touched on there, Chris. So I think it's that ability to have the strategic thinking, it's the problem solving, it's having the analytical view and looking at, and I think I always sort of talk about is that being ability to kind of take a step back and see the big picture. Really having an appreciation for not just what's going on right now, but as I was sort of saying, it's how is that business evolving? So with your thinking about bringing new products to the market and you're evolving the way that you operate, with how you deliver services, all of these things have a technology requirement that sits around it. And we don't want to be in this situation, as we were touched on, where we're always playing catch up. We want to kind of have the cyber security is firmly built in and part of the business. So I always kind of think about days of old. You always have business and IT as if they were two completely distinct areas, but actually they are both part of the business and they are both essential elements of the business as well. So in terms of that ability to just understand the context of the business and the market and the industry, because I think therefore from a CISO's perspective, and I think, you know, as we touched on before, it's that having that appreciation of security, but also, as we're saying, is that resilience as well. So if you assume compromise, you know, I can't just shut down the network from a cybersecurity perspective because it has a ripple effect across the business. And, you know, what's the business doing? What's their business continuity plans? What we're telling our stakeholders. So the actual response to any kind of cyber incident is actually much, much bigger than cyber. And actually, that's why it's really important that from that kind of stakeholder engagement, stakeholder management, that understanding and an appreciation of how all these things interplay, you have to kind of think much more strategic, as I sort of said, rather than just looking at it purely from a technology perspective. And also, let's not lose sight of what it is we're trying to protect in the first place. So we're not just protecting the infrastructure, we're protecting the data, and we're also protecting the people as well. So actually, how do all of those things interplay with each other?
Absolutely, the CISO is the custodian of data and people. I love it. That's great. And you're right. When a company has a major breach, you know, it's not usually the CISO who stood outside with the cameras. It's usually the CEO who's being briefed by the CIO, the CISO. So that ability to be able to put it into business context and what we're going to do about it seems to be even more critical these days.
Yeah.
Do you think there'll ever be a stage where, with that in mind, and the role of the CISO becoming ever more strategic and much less technical, do you think we'll ever get to a stage where candidates being considered for CISO positions actually don't come from that hardcore cybersecurity technical background, but maybe come from other areas of business, say change or transformation, or, you know, other areas where there are complementary skills, but then allow them to be a really effective cybersecurity leader?
Yeah, I think we're seeing that shift from, again, I think about maybe a few years ago when it was just about you had to be really, really technical and you had to have an array of certificates and to kind of prove that you understood all of these different things. But I actually think the value of being that kind of, just what say, that strategic leader and being able to kind of bring all these things together. So complementary areas would come from risk maybe, or something like that. So I see there's, in terms of the type of really good, successful leaders in this area, I think they've got a lot more of a business acumen, strategic thinking, and that they're coming in from that kind of area. But that's not to say that the deeply technical people aren't still needed. I think it's just a complementary of skills. And as Rich was saying, if we want it to move further to be a position on the board, which I feel that's really what we're looking for, rather than a kind of a few steps down. Actually, we need people who can operate and understand and work at that level as well.
I think it sounds like it's becoming even more critical these days that we're able to find individuals who can bridge both camps, business and cybersecurity and technology.